Excellencies, distinguished and esteemed representatives and guests, and fellow panelists. First, I would like to thank Their Excellencies Ambassador Mukungun Gay, Permanent Representative of the DRC to the United Nations, Ambassador Alfonso Webson, Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda, and Ms. Patricia Elias of Every Woman Treaty for convening this important discussion. I'm very sorry that I could not be with you here today in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to still participate in some shape or form. We are all too aware that we stand at a critical juncture where the global epidemic of violence against women continues unabated and where we are nowhere near addressing it. In fact, even though I am physically very far from New York, the collective anxiety characterizing the discussions at CSW because of the alarming regressions we are seeing in gender equality is very palpable, even to me. After all, despite the many calls for accelerating efforts to eradicate violence against women and girls, we are nowhere near that. Over the last 30 years, since the creation of the mandate, I and the former mandate holders, some of who are with us today, have invested in making concrete recommendations to states and other stakeholders what it would take to reverse this tide. And one of these recommendations that we have all consistently made is to address the normative protection gap. I join them in advocating and believing that adopting an optional protocol to the CEDAW Convention dedicated to ending violence against women and girls would greatly help us in doing so. Ironically, and as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of Beijing, let us remember the outcome document of the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, so the one of 1995, had called for a specific instrument on violence against women. In doing so, it mirrored a call made already 2 years earlier at the World Conference on Human Rights. Despite efforts and push, particularly by civil society, the world, however, could not adopt such an instrument and settled for the important, authoritative, but non-binding declaration on the elimination of violence against women. Don't get me wrong, this declaration is important. It holds considerable moral and political weight. We all use it in our advocacy, and it has played an important role in furthering the protection of women and girls against violence. However, it does not constitute a binding treaty, and therefore this normative gap continues. So with that in mind, I am very glad that, let's say, over the last year or so, or even more, there has been a clear momentum building and a bigger consideration by states on the possibility of having a dedicated treaty, possibly in the form of an optional protocol to CEDAW. Over the last perhaps 2 years, I have spoken at length as to why I joined some of the former mandate holders on violence against women in supporting the optional protocol. So I'm not going to repeat those points here. Rather, I would like to be forward-looking and focus on what the content of such a new protocol could be, how it could be implemented, and what are some of the ways of monitoring such a protocol. I should say that I now have a draft position paper that details that ready. I will be putting it online and sharing it with states, civil society, and experts after the CSW, with the hope of getting input and consulting all relevant stakeholders on it. And I hope that it can serve as an input to these important reflections. So I propose that the optional protocol should address four elements. The first is the legal definitions and forms of violence that should be contained or spelled out in the protocol. The protocol should acknowledge that there are established, clear, and widely recognized definitions of violence against women. They, as we said, are contained in the Declaration on Violence Against Women. They are contained in CEDAW General Recommendation 35 and other regional instruments. So it could acknowledge those and spell them out. Why is that important? Because it's been my position that an optional protocol should build on the jurisprudential advances that have been made, not ignore them, and certainly not regress from them. So that means it must also spell out very clearly the forms of violence that women and girls are subjected to, and that, as we know, are not limited to physical violence or sexual violence, but include also psychological violence and economic violence. They must also it must also speak to, in detail, to the forms of violence that are experienced, such as femicide, sexual harassment, intimidation at work, obviously domestic violence and intimate partner violence. But it should also go further to explicitly include the exploitation of prostitution of women, the sale and sexual exploitation of children, including girls, and also harmful practices such as child marriage and female genital mutilation. I also think that the optional protocol, given the emergence of new forms of violence, the protocol should also recognize that and therefore include those in its definitions. So things such as technology-facilitated gender-based violence against women and girls, the manifestations of the commodification and exploitation of women, their bodies, and their reproductive capacities, the increasingly gender and sex-specific crimes used and enlisted in times of conflict as tools of genocide and gender persecution. And I would also say that it should explicitly spell out how violence against women and girls can rise to be state and non-state sanctioned torture. Finally, when it comes to sort of definitions and scope, I do believe that the new optional protocol must speak in more detail to the fact that violence is often experienced as a continuum, that females go through their entire life circle, and that doesn't start with them becoming 18 years old. So that's kind of the first set of issues that the optional protocol should address. The second is obviously the obligations that states and I guess de facto authorities also have to ending, preventing, and responding to violence against women. States will be required to enact and enforce comprehensive legislation that criminalizes all forms of violence against women. They must also step up prevention activities, including through educational campaigns, training of law enforcement, and other policies and dedicated resources to end sex and gender-based discrimination and violence. That means also sufficient resources and sex and gender-specific measures for survivors of violence, such as, for example, shelters, legal aid, crisis services, all sort of services that must be accessible to all women in a victim-centered approach. And also the duty of states to prosecute and punish perpetrators. And then finally, the often overlooked issue of data collection, though it is really important because only if we have good data can we make good decisions. The third set of issues that the optional protocol should address is an explanation of how the protocol complements existing legal instruments and standards. By being a protocol to CEDAW, it will obviously complement CEDAW Convention and enhance the CEDAW framework by legally codifying protections that are currently outlined only in soft law instruments. I'm hoping also that the protocol will spell out how it will align with regional treaties, how it will reinforce the standards in those regional treaties, and how its application will ensure the harmonizations of standards, while at the same time addressing protection gaps in regions that actually don't have regional treaties. For example, the MENA region, the Asia region. It will also build on the jurisprudence of the CEDAW Committee, incorporating lessons learned from individual complaints and inquiries into systematic violations. And the final set of issues that I'm hoping the optional protocol can address, in fact, should address, is its implementation and monitoring mechanism. And here one can think really of two possible models. One model being oversight by the existing CEDAW Committee of Experts, and the second model could be the establishment of a specialized subcommittee dedicated to monitoring compliance with the optional protocol. If we look at the first model, the one on oversight by the CEDAW Committee, it could integrate the monitoring of the optional protocol into the committee's existing structure. And such an approach has the advantage of ensuring consistency in interpretation and the application of obligations while utilizing an already established mechanism, namely the monitoring mechanism of the CEDAW Treaty. The second model, which, as I said, entails the establishment of a specialized subcommittee, would actually allow for a dedicated focus on violence against women. This subcommittee could consist of experts that would be working on violence against women and girls issues, and that would provide and ensure a high level of technical expertise, and therefore also make highly specialized and targeted recommendations to states for their compliance. Now, a lot can be said about these two models, and both of them offer strengths, and both of them have certain weaknesses. And of course, certain consultation will be necessary to determine which one could be the best. Perhaps also during the consultations, we may identify even a third or fourth avenue for monitoring and implementation mechanisms. I will conclude by saying a few words about the way forward. To bring this optional protocol into existence, we now need a comprehensive, accelerated approach, acceleration being apparently the key word for this CSW. So I think we need to basically accelerate in our advocacy efforts. And here I'd like to urge the states that are friends of the optional protocol and others that have expressed an interest in supporting it to consider introducing a resolution to formally explore the drafting of the optional protocol. Now, where and in which forum this resolution should be introduced, whether at the CSW level or the Human Rights Council in Geneva, that's also something that needs to be looked at. The second recommendation I have is that we move with the establishment of a working group, a multi-stakeholder working group that compromises UN agencies, states, civil society, and women's rights organizations, and that could be entrusted with leading the drafting process, drawing on best practices. There are examples of similar exercises with very good results. For example, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has had a very participatory approach. And it's very important that this committee amplifies and involves all women and girls, irrespective of their diverse needs and experiences. There's also a need to step up the mobilization and engagement of civil society at global level. They must play a central role in this process, again, as I said, to reflect the lived realities of those most affected. And I would say we would even need to have multi-stakeholder consultations in various regions. So bring the consultations to the organizations and to the women and to victims. So I will stop here. To conclude, really, we can no longer afford in the current climate and context in which we live in to remain slow, to drag our feet. We must close this legal normative gap as millions of women and girls continue to suffer from violence without recourse, particularly, as I said, in areas not covered by any regional treaty. This is not a nice to have. Ending violence against women and girls is a moral and legal responsibility. It's also necessary for prosperous society. It's necessary for world peace and for ending conflict. And by adopting this optional protocol, we are sending a powerful message, namely that this is not a private matter, that it's a priority, that women's rights and girls' rights are human rights. And so the time for that really is not today, is not tomorrow. The time for that was yesterday. Thank you very much.